Hello, world. You're listening to Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, where we're always creeping it real. I'm your host, Eleanor Wagner. In February of 2019, I formed a paranormal investigation team primarily comprised of women. I called it the Lady Ghostbusters. Since then, the team has grown to include a team of 20 women and men. On today's program, I'll be interviewing a Lady Ghostbuster team member as part of the Lady Ghostbuster Series. On each episode, you'll meet a team member and get to know them personally, what their background is, what drives them, and what led them to the world of the paranormal. Let's give a warm welcome to today's guest, Laurel Devine. Welcome, Laurel.
Thanks for having me, Eleanor.
Think back to January of 2019. It was the first time we connected. You commented on a Hackettstown Facebook post regarding a woman who thought her house was haunted. You shared a story of your own childhood, and I contacted you to interview you for my first book, Sussex County Hauntings and Other Strange Phenomena. Do you remember at all what the story was that you shared on that post in the first place?
I do. It was actually two stories, but the one story was about my grandfather. When I was 10 years old, he came to me one night in the middle of the night when everyone was sleeping, and he sat on my bed, and he told me that he had to leave, and he was sorry, he was going to miss me, and he literally just kind of rubbed my leg and got up and walked right through the wall. And at that point, I went into my parents' room and I woke them up, and I told them that Grandpa was here and he was saying goodbye, and I was asking them what that meant, and they thought I was just having a childhood nightmare. They tried to put me back to sleep and calm me down, and as they were trying to calm me down and put me to sleep, the phone rang in the kitchen, and this was back in the 70s, and everybody had the one phone in the kitchen, and the phone was ringing, which was really weird because this was by now about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my parents looked at each other, and my mother went to go answer the phone, and it turned out it was my grandparents' neighbor who was telling my parents that they had taken my grandfather to the hospital, and they didn't expect him to make it. That was not the first situation that I had, but it was one of them.
Ultimately, he passed.
Ultimately, yes, he did. He was, by that morning, yes, he was gone.
So it was a definitive goodbye to you.
Oh, it was definitely, yes, and everyone knew it, yes. Mm-hmm.
And you said there was another?
The other story I was telling you about was our house in Phillipsburg. We had a rental house, and every single tenant that we had in there left. And some of them actually left in the middle of the night, saying that the house was haunted. And actually, when we bought the house, there were tenants in there that had just moved in, and they were only there a couple of weeks. And I got a call around 2 o'clock in the morning that they were leaving the house because there was something strange going on. So we just thought it was an excuse to move out. And when we went there the next day to see what was going on, you could feel something in the house. The next tenant that moved in was a young woman with an 8-year-old son, and she moved in, just her and her son, and they were there for maybe 2 or 3 months. And at that time, suddenly it was only like the third month and we never got the rent from her. So we went up to find out why the rent wasn't paid, and the house had been abandoned. The animals were abandoned, everything was abandoned, and we found out after going to the police station that her son had drowned in the tub. When we finally got a hold of her to find out what happened, she claimed that somebody drowned her son in the tub by holding him down while she was just turning around to grab a towel, and she couldn't help him. And she said that there was something in the house that was dangerous and deadly. At that point, we weren't really sure what to do, so I went and I saged the entire house thinking that would help. And when we bought that house, my husband was handling all the rental property. The next tenant that came in also moved out very quickly, and then we decided to revamp the house, get rid of the carpeting, and just like redo the house. Maybe that would help. And we had the carpet guys run out of the house not finishing the job, the electrician run out of the house not finishing the job, and multiple people would not go into the house, or they would go in and then they would leave. So we had another tenant move in, and they were there for a brief time, and all kinds of things were happening with them too. Their children were afraid to sleep in the room, and ultimately what everybody was telling me was that there was a man who had a knife who would go into specifically one bedroom. He was all over the house, but there was this one bedroom that nobody would use. And he was scary, and he was definitely not a benevolent spirit, and everybody was afraid of him. So we ended up just not getting, those tenants moved out in fear, and we decided at that point not to even put anybody else in there. We had a few situations where we tried to get rid of whatever was in there, and it would not go because we think it's on the block there, because there was other stories of other houses in that area that was having similar situations. We ended up actually giving the house back to the bank because we didn't want to be responsible for putting anybody else in that house, and there was really nothing. We had a few people in there, and even I've been doing this since 1979, and I wasn't able to get rid of whatever this was. And I don't think it was a demon. I think it was someone coming through a portal in this town of Phillipsburg, and I think he goes all around different houses because there was other houses on that block that there was terrible things that were happening as well.
That's a crazy story.
It's scary, yeah.
Well, I interviewed you for the first Warren County book, and that story is in the book. Exactly, because it was so interesting. But that initial interaction subsequently led to my interviewing you for that book, which took place in January of 2019. But if you recall, I reached out to you with an opportunity to be part of a paranormal investigation that was taking place at the Sterling Hill Mining Museum in Ogdensburg, New Jersey. Now, we didn't really know one another at that point, except for the fact that I interviewed you for my book. So technically you didn't know me from Adam, but you came along with me on that investigation anyway. Why?
When I talked to you for the first time, I got a really good feeling, and I felt like you were really looking to help people. You really wanted to learn a lot about all this different paranormal, and you wanted to do a lot of investigations. And I had not been doing investigations for some time because I had started investigating in the late 70s, 1978, 79. And the last few years prior to me speaking to you, I hadn't been doing investigations. And when you brought up the opportunity, I was really excited because I actually had been missing it. And also, I've heard about the mine, and I had never been in the mine, and I've actually read a couple of situations that were going on there, and I was excited to get in there and see it for myself.
It was a good investigation, wasn't it?
It was an excellent investigation.
I mean, that investigation had so much come up with everybody that was there. In fact, we had the interaction with the mist on camera. And
as we asked them to create the mist, they were creating it for us.
Right.
And then we all remember when we were walking through the bridge and all of us heard the screaming and it was almost like an explosion and then the screaming, and we all stopped dead in our tracks. And that's a good investigation when everybody feels and hears the same thing. And we all instinctively knew at that time exactly what it was and what was going on.
For the listening audience, there was a grate in the floor which was open to levels below. And back in the day, when the mine was an actual functioning mine, the explosions would take place down below those levels, and you could hear them on the upper floors. We were on that upper ground level and heard an explosion in a mine that hadn't been working for years.
Right. And then the really interesting part of it is after the investigation was all over, when we were talking to an employee of the mine, and he actually, when we told him what we heard, where we heard it, and what we had deduced from what we heard, he said that that is exactly what happened.
That's
Freddie Lubers. He confirmed, yes, that is exactly what happened, and he told us about all the men who died, how the explosion happened, and everything, even the names that we were coming up with. He confirmed that those names were in fact in the book of people who were killed and injured.
The miners who died.
Yeah, miners who died. It was really interesting.
And that interactive mist that we experienced, many of us got it on video that night. And I had selected what I thought was the best video from that grouping and sent it into Paranormal Caught on Camera, and they actually did an episode portion with our group in it because of that mist.
Right.
So that was really something.
That when you watch that video, there is absolutely no way you can't see that it was at will.
Right. And you could hear the reactions of us around. Oh my God!
Yeah,
I mean, we're legitimately freaking out.
Right.
and excited by this interaction, and that it was actually responding to our requests.
Exactly. And then also when a few of us came up with, we all were feeling our heads. A few of us were complaining about our heads, feeling like they were smashed in, and the pain. I was actually feeling searing pain. And then I said I felt blood dripping down my face, and I felt the life going out of me. And just as I was saying that, another one of our group came over, and he was feeling the same way. And we both, at the same exact time, said the same name. And it turned out that was somebody that was there that did get killed
in an accident.
In the mining accident, not with that particular explosion, but another mining accident where the thing fell, and the shaft fell on his head, and they found him later with his skull fractured and blood down his face. And we were actually reliving that situation. It was painful, and we were both getting very upset. And when we found out later that actually happened, it was really great.
The other team member that Laurel is speaking about is Art Peterson, and that was actually the first night that Laurel met him as well. And since then, the two of them have a great connection as far as the paranormal is concerned. They come up with the same stuff. They actually can finish each other's sentences. They know exactly what's happening. So I love to go on investigations when the two of you are there.
A lot of times we'll say something exactly simultaneously.
Right.
We'll come up with a name or a situation, or we'll see something and we're like it's simultaneously saying it. And
then you'll say something that's happened, and then he'll finish it off, and you'll pick up where he left off, and then by the end we'll end up getting this whole story of what actually happened because the two of you and that interaction between you two.
Yeah.
So it was amazing, and he's amazing, and the two of you together.
I love doing investigations with Art. Yeah.
As do I. That first investigation was great, and it was the start of a wonderful friendship. And since then, we've gone on numerous paranormal investigations together, along with the original team of women, and then a bunch of men and women that we picked up along the way. How would you say that this has affected your life, and what do you think about the Lady Ghostbuster team overall since then?
I love the Lady Ghostbuster team, and it's not just a team of investigators. We've become family and very close friends, and I love that everybody brings a little something different to the group. Everybody has their own gifts, and the way they work together, we end up really coming up with answers for people. Some of us are more clairvoyant, where others are more into the channeling, others are just more generally psychic. It just all works. And the way the team came together is we don't have a lot of people who are all doing the same thing, which can cause problems when everybody's doing exactly the same thing. But it turned out that everybody seems to have their own gift, which all works so well together. And I think that wasn't by accident.
No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence.
Right. It's, the way it happened, it's definitely by design. And it works so well. And I see that when we do the investigations, the way we end up doing them and the answers we get with all the team members really help the people that are asking for our expertise. They really are.
Or want answers or clarification. The way I describe it is that each of us is a piece of the puzzle, and when we put that puzzle together, we get that answer.
Exactly.
And I really do feel like 90% of the time, I feel like we come out of there with what they wanted and our reason for going there. And if we didn't get it all, you better believe within the next few weeks we will.
Right.
It'll come to fruition.
Right. Because we even have, in addition to all our clairvoyants and our psychics and our channelers, we also have historian who, once we get all the information, it's wonderful that she could go and to investigate our investigation and come up with the names and the proof and where they were buried and all the historical information that just really ties everything together so nicely. And when you present that, because there's one thing to come up and say, oh, we have this person and he's saying this, but then when you do the historical investigation side of it, and then you come up with an actual photographs of these people and their life, and you find where they're buried, and that really adds to it. And I think that's why our group really is above the rest, because most investigation teams don't go that extra mile.
Laurel is speaking about Brittany Iwansky, our team member, the historian, and she loves what she does. And if I have a location that we're going to I will give her the information about the address and what little I know prior, and she'll look to see if she can get anything about it before we go. And then oftentimes she'll find something else out after we're done. But there are occasions that we're on an investigation where she'll use her phone right away and Google. For example, we were at Brick and Mortar.
Yes.
On our second investigation there, and we kept getting the name Hockenberry.
Right.
And so she said, I'm going to Google and see if there's any Hockenberry. And sure enough, Hockenberry lived in Lafayette.
Right.
And we were talking to him that night.
Exactly. Yeah.
And several weeks later, I think I might have told you, Brittany and I found his grave in the Lafayette Cemetery. So that was how it came full circle.
Right.
Well, you came to me with over 40 years of experience. You're a third-generation sensitive, with your one grandmother being a Hungarian gypsy and the other a psychic. Tell me a little bit about that and your history with them.
Sure. So my grandmother on my father's side is Hungarian, and her family were actually Hungarian gypsies. And she never ever called herself a gypsy or a psychic or anything like that. But because of the family history, and my great-grandmother, she used to do readings, and she also was clairvoyant. My grandmother just learned, to her it was just a normal way of life. And she used to do it all the time when I was a child. She would know if somebody was sick, and she would tell them that they have to go to the doctor. She would tell them exactly what was wrong. And she would be able to do laying of hands, where she would lay her hands on you and heal you. And she told me that she learned that from her grandmother, and her mother also did that. She also would, both my grandmothers, they both had a situation where they would know if somebody was going to be coming over or if somebody was going to be calling. Both of them would say things like, oh, we can't leave right now because Annie's going to call, or, my sister's going to call, or whatever. And 5 minutes later, the phone would ring. And if people were there, other than me, because I was used to it, they would, if they had company and they would see that, they would say, well, how do you know that? And neither one of them could actually explain how. They just, I don't know. I just know. Don't you? It was almost like they would question, well, don't you know? Because they thought everybody had that exact ability.
Which you hear a lot from people.
Yes.
As children, they'll think the other kids are just the same. And then when they go to school and they get teased or picked on, they find out, I'm different.
Exactly. But back in the day, when my grandmothers were alive, there wasn't a lot of talk about psychic things. I think in the 1920s, it was really big, and then it kind of started to wane. And at that point, there wasn't, a lot of people didn't understand what they were doing or how they were doing it.
They just knew they could.
They just knew they could. And a lot of people used to come to my father's mother, and I would come in. I used to spend summers at my grandparents' houses, and I would come in the kitchen, and my grandmother would be sitting at the kitchen table with someone. The way she did it is she would do readings by holding your hands. And she would just have her eyes shut and hold your hands.
Oh, that's so
and
interesting.
it would come to her. And that's how she did it. And that was actually something I was used to.
Right.
It was not a weird thing. And it would be like, oh, I knew that when I walked in, if my grandmother was doing that, I had to be quiet, don't make noise. And I would leave the room until she was done. And then sometimes she would say, oh, that poor woman, or, oh, everything's going well, or, oh, something great's going to happen. And people would come back, and she never charged or anything. It was just people would come and ask her what she thought, and they would hold hands, and she would basically do a reading. Mm-hmm. My other grandmother, this is my mother's mother, is Italian, and she had the exact same type of gift, only she used it a little different. What she used to do more than anything was people's health. My other grandmother did that as well, but that wasn't her specialty. But my other grandmother's specialty was she could tell you if you had anything, even something small, like you're going to be getting a sore throat, here, take this. She would give you something to take, or be very careful, you're going to break your leg. If they didn't listen, it would actually happen. And people would say, how did you know that? I don't know, but you should be, so people knew when my grandmother said something, listen. Mm-hmm. She also had this thing where she would call you, and she would say, out of the blue, and she would be like, do not drive down Route 80 at 2 2:00 on Wednesday. Like very specific, very, very specific. And you didn't even ask why. You would say, okay, and you would check your watch and you would make sure that you were not. You just got to the point where you knew that she was right. And if every time you didn't listen to her or you poo-pooed what she was saying, she ended up right.
Right.
So it's funny because my mother knew my grandmother's gift, and my mother has a little bit of a psychic gift, but not as strong as either of my grandmothers. So from my earliest memory, I had it. And nobody ever really taught me. Neither one of my grandmothers ever said, here, let me show you how it's done. Never. It just kind of grew,
but
you know?
It would have been nice if they did, though, because I feel like you probably would have been even more in tune from an earlier age.
I think they knew I already was in tune.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they wanted to push it too much because I was also having these kinds of situations. I remember one time...
Which can probably be scary, too.
It was very scary. One time that my mother brings up all the time because I don't really even remember it. But my mother tells me, and you know, the whole family talks about this. When I was about 3 years old, the neighbor came over and she was having coffee with my mother. And they said that I was watching like Mr. Rogers, and I came into the kitchen and I started screaming on the top of my lungs, oh my gosh, you're gonna die, like very upset.
Oh my.
And I was saying, you have to go get checked, you have to go see the doctor right now. And I was just inconsolable. And so my mother, knowing the history of her mother, said, you know, I think she may have the same gift that my mother has. I think you really should go to the doctor. And the woman was obviously like, what is going on here? But she's, I just do it. It turned out she had an aneurysm.
Ooh.
And she needed surgery. Now, I had no idea. I honestly don't even remember this happening.
Right.
This was all told to me from family members who knew about it. And ever since then, there's certain things that I could tell. I'm not a medical intuitive per se, but there's certain things. If somebody has cancer, I know it. I can smell it, and I can warn them. I can tell them, because sometimes they don't know.
I can attest to that, audience. Half the time when I see Laurel, I ask her, do I have cancer? Do you smell cancer? And she promises that she will let me know if she ever smells the cancer.
Yes. So that happens all the time. And then usually if something is very, very imminent, whether it be an accident or someone's health, it will come through. And it has come through. I think I told you the story.
You told me the story. I think you were at
the
high
party.
School age at the party.
Yes, I was just going to tell that story. So I was about 16, maybe 17 years old, and I was at a party at my boyfriend's house. And there was a group of people there that I had just started dating him, and I didn't really know all his friends. And there must have been about maybe 25, 30 people at the party. And we were just hanging out, and this group of people, it was 2 girls and 2 guys, and they were getting ready to leave. And, you know, they were saying goodbye to everybody, and my boyfriend went over, and he was like, all right, see you later. And all of a sudden, and sometimes what happens is I can't even control it. No, don't leave. Do not leave now. You have to wait. I was screaming. I was like, no, don't leave. Just stay. You have to stay for at least a half an hour. Do not go anywhere. Well, luckily my friend Sally was with me, and she knew of my gift because my newer boyfriend didn't know yet. I hadn't like common knowledge yet, and none of the other people at the party even knew me. So Sally went up to my boyfriend and he said, can you really, I've known Laurel for a very long time. If she's saying this, can you please tell them not to leave? Just don't ask questions. Just do it and we'll explain later. So he was like, I don't know what's going on. You know, he was like, this is really weird. But he said, look, I don't know what's going on, but my girlfriend is telling you not to leave, and her friend is saying you better listen. Can you just hang out for a little bit longer?
Right.
So they shrugged and were like, all right, I'll have another beer. And they sat down and they stayed for a little bit. And all of a sudden, I got this feeling. I'm like, all the stress and all the angst just went away.
Dissipated.
And I said, you can leave now. And they're rolling their eyes because they don't know me. It turned out that there was just slightly raining, and there was black ice on Route 23. There was a 16-car pileup in the direction they were going. And if they had left a half an hour earlier, they would have ended up in that pileup.
Didn't they get stuck in traffic and have to
They got stuck in a lot of traffic. And what happened was they left, and about maybe 45 minutes later, they come back, and there's a knock on the door, and it's them. And they were wild-eyed and like... and they're like, what are you? And they're like, there is a huge pileup. Everything is backed up for miles. And it was actually the next day, it was in the paper with photographs of this pileup. There was trucks that were jackknifed on Route 23. I had only been dating him maybe, I would say maybe about a month and a half. And he was like,
did he go off? Did he take off running?
He came over to me and he's like, all right. He goes, I'll never forget it as long as I can live. He goes like this. He goes, all right, how did you know that? What the heck? Like that. Oh, and then I started to explain it, and Sally, my friend Sally, who was there with me, she goes, here, let me just explain what. And
she's your PR person.
Yeah, she was like, this is, and she explained the whole thing about my psychic ability, and this happens every once in a while, and I'm gonna stay with Laurel. If she tells you this, something like this, just listen, because I guarantee whatever she's telling you to do or not do, don't do it or do it, because she's always right. So that was one, and then that's when, that is the point which everybody wanted a card reading all of a sudden, and it like wildfire, because they told people and everybody, so everybody's like, I had people calling me, should I know anything? Is anything going to happen to me? I'm supposed to go down the shore, should I go? All this crazy stuff, and it doesn't work like that. I could do a reading for you, but you can't just call me and say, is there an accident in a half an hour? Like, it doesn't work like that. But it was funny because after that, I was doing card readings all the time. I would be in school because everybody at school, I was still in high school, and everybody heard about what happened at Scott's house, and everybody was coming up to me, can you do a reading? Can you do this? Is there anything you got to tell me? Should I know anything? And that's how the whole thing really started, with me doing kind of quote unquote professionally. It was at that point.
That is so interesting. That's crazy. Well, you did say that you started doing investigations in around 1979.
Right.
Were you with a particular group? And if so, how did that come about, and how did you go about doing your investigations?
Well, that's another interesting story. So not too long after this situation at Scott's house with his friends, I was, at the time I was working at Burger King, and I was a cashier at Burger King. And this couple used to come in all the time, and everybody used to call them the Munsters. She had long black hair, and he kind of looked a little strange to everybody. And they used to come in once a week, every Tuesday, because they had some type of an appointment down where the Burger King was, where I was working. And they would come in for lunch, usually around 2 o'clock. And they started to look at me. I would find them just kind of staring at me as they were eating. And my friends that I was working with would be like, these people are staring at you, looking at you. Do you know them? And it was getting a little creepy, to be honest. And I'm like, no, I have no idea who they are. And I just kind of ignored it. And this went on for, maybe a couple months, actually. And then one day they came in and they asked me when my break was. And I said, I told them that my break was like 4 o'clock, and they said they're going to come back. They would like to talk to me.
Creep me out.
I was very creeped out. As a matter of fact, one of my friends, Brent, that worked with me, he was leaving at 2, and he said, you know what, I'm going to hang out and stay until after you talk to them, because I don't know, this is weird. So at 4 o'clock they came back. I was on break, and we sat down in one of the booths, and the husband and wife sat on one side, I sat on the other, and they're looking at me, and he said, I don't want to scare you, but I see something in you. He said, I do paranormal investigations, I train on astral projection, I do tarot card readings, and he listed all these things that he does. And he said, I'm actually looking for a protege because I'm getting old. They were in their late 60s at the time. His name was John and Eleanor.
John Riley.
Okay,
yes. I remember you mentioned that he was your mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, and his wife was Eleanor.
Okay.
And they said they were looking for a protege to work under them for a few years and then eventually take over for them. And they wanted to know if I would be able to come over to their home. And it turned out that I had never met them, or I didn't know where they were from, but it turned out they lived only about 10 minutes from my home. So I was like, I was intrigued. And so we set something up for that following Saturday, and I went over the house, and I brought my boyfriend Scott with me because I was like, I don't know, these people are going to kill me or what?
Exactly.
I have no idea. Maybe they're not, So we went over, he and I went over, and we sat in their living room, and the four of us were sitting there, and he said, I know, I can tell, because I can feel it, that you have very strong psychic abilities, and I would like to kind of hone them so that you can do readings and you can do investigations with us. so I'd like to be your like teacher and train you. And he had written a couple books. He had written a book on astral projection, on investigations. He actually wrote a book on time travel. So he was like, I'm giving you these books. He gave me 3 or 4 books that he had written, and he said, when you get a chance, read through these, and because this is kind of where I'd like to go with you. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to start me on tarot card readings and regular card readings. So we started there, and then as I got better and better, and there's a lot of stories surrounding that, but as I started to get better and better on that, he started inviting me to investigation. And the first investigation we ever went on, he told me not to say anything, even if I felt anything or heard anything. Don't say anything. I just want you to be an observer, and we will talk about whatever you saw or heard or felt after when we go home. Don't say anything. Okay, so I just literally sat there and observed him, his wife, and this other gentleman doing an investigation. And they did investigations a little differently, more old school investigations. So that's kind of what I'm used to. But when we got home, when it was all over, that guy went home, and Eleanor and John and I went to his house, and he said, there was something there that I didn't mention. And I asked everybody to not mention one thing that we saw to see if you could pick it up. And I immediately said yes, and I told him what I saw and what I heard. And he said, exactly. And he had cassette recorders at the time.
Sure.
And we used to bring 2 or 3 with us, and he had one, and he said, I want you to hear something, because I had told him what I heard. And he said, yes, and I want you to hear this tape because I heard it too. And he clicked the recorder, and there was exactly what I had just told him I heard was right there as an EVP on the cassette. And he said, yes, you got this. And so after that was kind of my induction into, and then after that, I was like part of the team. And then I was part of the team with him from 1979 to 1997.
Oh, that's quite a while.
Yeah.
But you said he taught you tarot, time travel, astral projection, clairvoyance, and I'm fascinated with each of these topics. I know firsthand how wonderful you are with the tarot.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the time travel lessons you learned. I've always wondered about time travel and if it's even possible. I even imagined myself traveling.
Yeah.
And I would love to have you share some examples of time travel.
Sure. Time travel and astral projection are very, very similar. Both situations are where you're leaving your body and you're going elsewhere. You're seeing what's happening. So time travel is just seeing in a different dimension of a different time. So either it could be the past or it could be future. Whereas astral projection is time travel in the present. That's really an easy way to put it.
And a lot of people astral project and don't even realize it.
A lot of people astral project and don't even realize it. As a matter of fact, I had been astral projecting and I never realized it myself. And that's why there are things you can do to hone that skill and make sure what you're doing is actually astral project. So if you want to talk about astral projection for a minute first, before we get on the time travel. So the way John did it with me was we would have a night which would be astral projection night, and we would take turns as a group.
It's kind of funny to think about. Come on over for the beer party.
Yeah, glass of wine, some astral projection. So astral projection night was we would get together as a group, and we only had 4 or 5 people in the investigation, the paranormal investigation group, but we had about 12 people in the astral projection and the time travel group. They were different groups. And we would go, and what we would do is we would choose out of the group, out of the 12 people, each time it would rotate, 2 or 3 people that were going to be doing the astral projections that night. And what we would do is set up teams. So say I would be the projector and you would be the projectee. We would pick a time when I was going to come to you or where you were going to come to me. And let's say I was going to come to your house. We would know what time, and your job was to put something out that would be obvious, like a shoe on the stove or something weird
that
you would pick up on that wasn't supposed to be there. Right. What would happen is at a certain time you would try to meditate, and there are ways to learn how to astral project at will. Very difficult, but after a while that was was the point of this, to try to get yourself to be able to do it at will, which takes a while. And then concentrate on astral projecting to the location where the projectee was going to put something out for you. And you had to go through their entire house and figure out what that thing was, where they put it, and what it was. And then the next day, we would get together, and then John would say, okay, and he would have the person who put whatever out write it down on a piece of paper and give it to him, like fold it up and give it to him. And then he would say, okay, you were in their house. Did you notice anything weird? Did you notice anything? And you would say, yes, I saw like
the shoe on the stove.
Right, the shoe on the stove. Or one time she took the living room chair and she placed it on top of a bed in her guest room. And I said, yes, so that was the one, that was the first one. And I said, yeah, I said, it was weird. I said, this could be crazy, but I was going through your house and I saw a chair sitting on your bed. And he unrolled up what she said.
Paper, right?
And the paper said, I put the chair on top of the bed in the guest room. So it took a while to get to that point.
Right.
But once you can do that, you can do that at will, and it actually becomes very simple. That's what we would do. And then the next time it would be my turn to put something, and they would come to my house and they would have to say. So it was kind of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Can astral projecting be dangerous to somebody?
If you don't know what it is and you panic, yes. People have gotten hurt more because they panic and they've fallen because they're fighting it. Because what happens is your body stays, basically your spirit is like lifting up off, and if you're fighting it and panicking, people have been known to fall off the bed, hit their head because they're thrashing around in bed.
Is there any fear of your spirit not getting back into your body?
No, because your spirit, unless you're dead or you die, your spirit is going to, and it's not dangerous to go into someone else's home to do this.
Because they're not going to even know you're there unless they're a person watching out for you.
Right. And you want to do this when you're learning this. Like the way that John explained it is when you're learning to do this, and if you really want to do something like this, you have to do it with people that understand it and will keep you calm. In case you get to someone's house and you start to panic, they would feel that. One time, one of the people in our group, it was another young girl that was maybe 2 years older than me at the time, and she did panic in someone's house. And that person felt that she was panicking and was able to psychically talk her through and calm her down and say, you can leave, you can go back home, we can do this another time. You have to also be a little bit psychically connected to the people that you're learning with. It's the best way. People that try to do things like this on their own, some either A, end up panicking, or B, end up not really being able to do it at will, because you really need to practice, and you really need to be able to practice with people know what they're doing. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is so interesting.
Yeah. So and then getting back to, I know you wanted to actually talk about time travel, which is essentially, like I said, time travel is nothing more than astral projection, only instead of going to someone's house in the present or a location in the present, you will yourself to go someplace in either the past or the future.
Oh my gosh, you know what that reminds me of? Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and he does that.
Right.
Literally, he listens to these tapes over and over again.
Right.
And is that similar to what he did in that movie?
Yes, and it's very interesting because when you're time traveling, when you're traveling to either the past or the future, because keep in mind, people don't understand, all the dimensions are here now. The present is here now, the past is still here, and the future is here. It's all different dimensions, but you can travel between all the different dimensions. That's why when people say, oh, they're doing an investigation, what a lot of people don't understand is you're not necessarily seeing a haunting. You may be seeing one of the other dimensions, and they're mistaking it for a haunting. You really have to kind of know what dimension you're in at what point.
Is that kind of how residual energy or residual hauntings?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Residual hauntings, which a lot of people mistake for present hauntings, are nothing more than the spirits are actually astral projecting. They're projecting, they're time traveling, and they're doing the same thing over and over and over. It's an energy, because we're all energy. You and I sitting here, we're nothing more than energy. This desk is nothing more than energy. Everything, the past is energy that keeps playing over and over like a record, and the future is already happening. We just haven't caught up to it yet. We haven't entered that particular dimension yet. So when you learn to time travel and when you learn to really astral project at will, you realize that these different dimensions are all here at the same time, and you can go travel from one to the other. And to time travel, I never was able to time travel into the future. John said I did, but I think I was more dreaming that one. But I did time travel to the past, and it was very interesting because when I time traveled, I had no goal in mind. I just wanted to time travel. I didn't care where or when. I just wanted to try it. And I ended up time traveling back to what looked like, it was like the early 1920s. And I saw all these people, and I saw what looked exactly like my grandmother, only she was very young. And I was in a building that was 3 stories. It was a row house, and I could hear everybody talking. I could see everybody. They were talking in German, and I was interacting with one of the people. And it turned out, when I was done, I had no idea what it meant. And I told John, and he wrote down everything I said as I was talking, and he gave it to me. And he said, well, maybe you'll figure out what this is. I think he
Were you under hypnosis?
No, we'd go to sleep, and he would tell me, okay, like he told me how to do this. So he had a bedroom in his house where that it was used for these types of purposes. So you can go in and close the door, and you would spend the night. And that way, if there was a problem, he and his wife Eleanor were there. And a lot of people did panic. A lot of people ended up, they needed help, or they would come back so excited and they wanted to tell somebody. Right. So they would be there waiting for you. They basically were up all night. They were people that stayed up all night and slept during the day. So this happened. I came back. I told him everything that happened, and he wrote everything down. And then a couple of days later, I was telling my mother about it, and her face was like, her eyes were like giant saucers. And she's like, can you describe that for me? And I described the interior of the house and how it was 3 stories, and there was a spiral stair. And then I was talking to a man, but it's weird because I could understand what he was saying, but he was speaking a different language. So it wasn't like he was talking, but not talking. It was almost like I could hear him, but not with my ears. It was very strange. I had never experienced that before. But when I was explaining it, she goes, oh my gosh, she goes, I'm going to show you a picture. So she goes upstairs, and she's upstairs, I can't find it, and I hear her swearing and everything and all this stuff. And she finally comes down, she goes, and she had the picture down, so I couldn't see it. And she said, tell me one more time, describe this place, and describe the outside. And I said exactly what it looked like, the color and everything. It was beige, and the house next to it was brick, and it was row houses, and the road was like on an incline, so the houses were straight, but you could see more and more of the basements, like the downstairs of them. And she turns the picture over, and there's the picture of what I just described and what I saw. And I said, well, what is that? And she says, that's your father's mother's house. That's where she grew up, in Paterson, New Jersey, of all places.
Wow.
So, of course, John, Eleanor, me, and 2 others in the group, we got in the car like 2 days later after that, and we drove down because I had to see it for myself. Sure. It was still beige, and I didn't even know at that point that my grandmother lived in a row house in Paterson. I had no idea, and I never knew that, and it was like so amazing. And then what was really amazing is the person that was communicating with me was my grandmother's brother, who had died right around that time, that had been there, like right in the 20s. He had died, and he was talking to me, and I wish I had paid more attention, but I was just so excited I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying. We were actually communicating.
And why do you suppose that he was communicating with you? Was he already dying, or... that's so
I don't know. I have no idea. But I described him to my father. Now, my mother had never met, because this was my father's family. And I described him to my mother, and she's like, I don't know. By the time my mother and father got married, all my grandmother's brothers and parents were all dead. She never met any of them. So she said, well, when Daddy gets home, let's talk to him, and you describe him. And I said, so my father was not into any of this stuff. Like, he was like a naysayer. And I said, when he came home, I said, I had this situation, and I was talking to this person, and this is what he looked like, this is what he sounded like, this is what the interior of the house looked like. And he looked at me and he goes, wow, I really hate to say it, but that was my Uncle Carl. And I was like, wow. I had described him so clearly that he even recognized. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we had a lot of fun doing this stuff. That was just one.
And when you're time traveling, is there any danger involved in that? Getting stuck in time?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know if anybody has ever gotten stuck. None of our group ever did.
Right.
And I never even had that fear. The other good thing about this is when I was doing all this, it was like when we were doing a lot of this, I was between the ages of 17 and 22. You don't think about these things.
No.
Like now, I would be...
Yeah. What was I thinking?
Yeah, I would be like, am I going to come back? Like, but at the time, you're not thinking like that. You're just thinking, wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh my God, that I would just love to time travel for sure. The clairvoyance thing? Clairvoyance. Yeah, what is that?
Clairvoyance is when there's all different types of psychic ability. Clairvoyance is when you actually hear the voices speaking. It's when you can hear the EVPs. Mm-hmm. When people can only hear them on EVPs, a clairvoyant can hear them as it's happening. And also, the other thing that a lot of clairvoyants can do is they can speak through you. So they can sometimes they use your voice where they'll be taught, like you'll notice that I'm saying things, but it's my voice still, but I don't sound necessarily like me because I may be saying something, or I may be speaking in a different language, which has happened, or I may sound more manly, or I may be speaking in a way that I don't usually talk.
Right.
Or sometimes they actually really speak through you using your voice, whereas your voice will change. So there's been, it doesn't happen a lot, but there have been times where, especially if I'm doing an actual clairvoyant session where I'm relaxed and I'm actually trying to speak to one specific person, they will actually speak through me, whereas my voice completely changes. I may end up speaking a different language. I may end up speaking with some type of a brogue or an accent or something. And a lot of times when that happens, even when whether they're speaking through you or actually using your voice, a lot of times when you're done, you have no recollection of what you actually said. So usually what we like to do is record it so I can actually hear what I said myself.
Right. Well, it kind of makes sense if somebody was taking you over and using your body and your vocal cords for you to probably not remember.
Yeah. That
would make sense.
Yeah.
Now, what does it mean to be a medium?
A medium, it's the generic term for being able to contact spirits. So a medium is the overall arching word to use, and then it breaks down into what kind of medium. Are you a clairvoyant? Are you a psychic? Are you sensitive? Different people's different gifts. So when people say I'm a medium, all that really means is that they're proclaiming that they are able to speak to spirit. That it's like an overreaching arch.
I see. I understand. Yeah. Now, you also said you like to use old school methods of investigating and spirit communication. What does that mean exactly? I mean, I have a general idea from what you and I do on our investigations ourselves, but if you could just give us an overall definition of it.
When I say old school, I guess really what I say is old way of doing it. When we used to do investigations, basically what we used is a candle, maybe 2, 3, sometimes 4 recorders. We used to use sometimes lights and cameras.
Why the candle?
Just to keep it dark, and a lot of times a spirit can blow out the candle for you.
Okay.
So
kind of
it's
like what we do with flashlights.
Flashlights, right. The other thing we used to do is how do I put this? I want to say what we were looking for was proof. When I say investigation, we were not going on an investigation to go talk to spirit or to see if there's a ghost. Or what we were doing was the classic term of investigation, meaning we had to know what, where, who, and we had to have proof, meaning we had to have EVPs. We had to have a photograph. We had to have something to show that this is what this person, who this is, and why they're here. So we didn't go by, if I was picking up on a spirit and nobody else was, then that we would just think that's just somebody going through. Remember we were talking about the different dimensions, somebody going from dimension to dimension. Because the way we looked at it is if we were all mediums, all of us in the group, we only had mediums in the group. So if there was somebody there, we all should be looking at it, seeing it. So if we were all seeing something different, the way we would look at it was we were all seeing different parts of the dimension, not necessarily what we were there to investigate. So if somebody said, I'm having all these situations in my house. There's the banging, there's this, there's that. What we would be doing is looking for not everything that's there in the house, because since we're all in different dimensions at all times, you're going to find all kinds of things. We honed in on that particular entity. What is it? Who is it? And why are they there? We didn't go off on, there's a girl over there, there's a man over there, because if they weren't part of what we were investigating, we ignored that, because that you're going to find that everywhere. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you go, you're going to find that, and then it kind of gets you off track. So we would try to figure out if somebody was saying that there were banging and there was, somebody moving things around in their house. That's what we were investigating. Who is moving things around in your house? Why were they doing that? And what was the reason behind it? And did they want, was there some type of message or whatever? And when something is strong enough to do something like that, if an entity is strong enough to create noise or to move objects or to manifest themselves that you can see them, they're going to be strong enough that anyone who is a true medium or a true psychic will be able to see it. So everybody should be seeing the same thing if it's there. If not, what you're seeing is all the extraneous entities, and there's always stuff like that around, and so you don't want to get off onto different tracks. So we would try to figure out, and a lot of times either we would all see it and we would know what it was, and we could give it the homeowner or the business owner a report on what we found. Mm-hmm. We would give them an actual John would actually do a written report with photographs. He would make copies of the EVPs, give them at that time a cassette tape of the EVPs, photographs of what we saw, photographs or video of whatever was happening in the house with a written report on what we found. Now, other times we would say, no, it's not a haunting, because a lot of times we found that maybe it was the pipes in a lot of people, the pipes are knocking, or the they need an electrician to come. So we would do that too. We would figure out
debunk something.
We did a lot of debunking. It was probably 50% debunking and 50% coming up with. And then if there was extraneous things going on, we ignored it. We didn't even mention it to the homeowner, because there's always entities in and out, because all the dimensions are all one. So there's people from the past, the present, the future. So
does that past continuously replay itself?
Not continuously, no. But every once in a while you'll have a situation where something gets stuck, and it could get stuck and it could unstick itself on its own, or it may need help. Especially if, let's say, there's a situation where somebody's in the house and there was a situation where something is stuck and it's affecting the people that live in the house. They keep slamming the door over and over and over again. You don't want that, because it's scaring the kids, it's waking you up in the middle of the night. So you have to kind of go and say, you're stuck here, can you please exit stage left? Can we help you to, why are you here?
Right.
Or whatever. Other times it doesn't really affect anybody. Like the women that were in my house when I bought it, that didn't affect anybody. I didn't want them to go anywhere. As a matter of fact, when they did finally unstick themselves and leave, I was actually kind of depressed. I missed them. I missed them. Everything doesn't necessarily require a fix. Sometimes if it's not really bothering somebody, just because something is turning off the lights once in a while, or if you hear footsteps, that's not necessarily something you have to get rid of.
Right.
Because eventually, 9 times out of 10, eventually they move on their own and they go back to their own dimension.
Now, out of all the investigations we've done together on the Lady Ghostbuster team so far, which one of them is your favorite?
The Salon in Vernon.
Oh, Magnolias.
It's
called Magnolias now.
Yeah.
That definitely came full circle.
That was the most interesting.
How that came to fruition was I had written about that building in my first book, Sussex County Hauntings and Other Strange Phenomena. A friend of mine owned her antique consignment shop in that building when she was experiencing stuff. So I'd never gotten in there for an investigation. It was just her story and other stories that I got from people over the years. Then after the book was in print and published, the woman from Magnolias reached out to me saying, I would love for you to come and do an investigation because I'm having activity in here. And then that was just like, oh yes, we want to get in there, because we'd always wanted to.
Right.
The reason why we never did, with my friend had the consignment shop in there, was because he upped the rent and she was moving and it just never happened.
Oh, it's a shame.
So, but Magnolias happened, and that's how we got in there. Yeah. And so, go ahead, explain what happened.
Oh, gosh. When we first got there...
Are you talking about the original investigation?
The original, the very first investigation. We first got there, the very first time we walked in, and the minute I walked in the house, I heard all those children. Mm-hmm. It was almost deafening. I heard children crying and children screaming and children moaning.
Now, just for the listening audience benefit, the house is an old Victorian that was once owned by a sea captain, and the sea captain has been seen over the years by many people. So that part we knew was that he haunted this building. Of course, there are a whole bunch of stories that he hung himself.
But see, I didn't know that at the time because I didn't want to know anything. Exactly. So all I knew was I was going to a salon in Vernon. Yes.
But the sea captain had a brother, so they were two brothers that were involved in this building. So go ahead, go with the story.
So as soon as we walked in the front door, I can hear children, lots of children, and I felt that they were under duress. It wasn't happy children sounds. It was more sad, scared, petrified even children's sounds. And then while we were doing the investigation, I kept getting drawn to that back room where they did the pedicures and the nails, and there was fireplace, and the fireplace had a wall, and I was immediately drawn to the right side of the wall, and I said, there's something in here. And we couldn't figure out because it just looked like a wall, but there was like a step there, and I said, this is a staircase, and this is where something happened in here, and why is this closed up? Remember? So we knew there was something with this staircase going up, and then when we went upstairs, we also were feeling children. In the attic. Mm-hmm. Then once we got up there, we were all getting very sad. I remember feeling very sad and
my daughter Cassidy and her boyfriend Eric actually heard a music box, and one of the toys in a box disappeared in that attic portion of the building. So there was definitely stuff missing that showed up, and vice versa.
Right. So, and then once we got up there, you almost felt this fear. You felt afraid. You felt like something bad was going to happen to you. You got that feeling like you wanted to say, I don't like it up here. It's not nice up here. There's something bad happened up here. And then we found that room with the lock on the outside of the door, and it was just in the attic, a square room with a door with the lock on the outside. And and when you walked into that room, it was a horrible, horrible feeling. It was just like, I just remember feeling like my chest was so sad, I wanted to cry. And then when we went into the other room where they had the break room that we were sitting in, we were seeing that woman who wanted to talk to us. There was a woman there that wanted to speak to us. When we went back downstairs, we were telling the salon owner that we felt that she needed to open up that wall. That wall had to be opened up, expose the staircase, and that would give us a lot of the answers.
Right.
And we went back, and she had actually pulled that down, and lo and behold, there's this beautiful staircase that went up to a secret room between the two floors that we couldn't even find, because when we went up the other staircase, we ended up above it, and when you're downstairs, you're below it, and the only way to get to that room was that one staircase.
And you were there with Art Peterson that time.
Yes.
And you guys unearthed scratching and writing.
Oh, well, we got to go back.
Okay.
Wait, we have to go back because that was amazing. Art and I went upstairs.
In that room?
In the room where you felt like the children were being locked. And all of a sudden, I said, I'm seeing somebody named Sarah. And then somebody else said they were seeing Sarah. And then Art started to cry. And I said, somebody is saying, help me, help me. We were all finishing each other's sentences. And then he said, I see somebody begging for help, writing something, scratching something. Help me, help me, help me. And I said, yes, it's somebody, Sarah. And then I think it was his wife or somebody decided to close the door.
Liz, probably.
Liz closed the door. And behind the door, which we never looked behind that door. I don't know why. But when the door was shut, they were scratched, probably 100 years ago, you could see the door was so old. Scratched, and it was names, Sarah, Jacob, Samuel, and help us. It scratched into the wall. Remember that? Oh my God. He got photographs of it. He took pictures of it. And it's funny because we were saying it, and all of a sudden Liz goes, I think it was Liz, goes, guys, do you hear what you're saying? And we're like, yeah. And she said, look. And there, what we were saying was there on the door. It was one of those wow moments.
Now, didn't one of the team members get scratched also?
Punched.
After
after that, we went because that whole thing stirred up a lot of stuff. And we went back a third time to try to cleanse and see if we could find out who was there and was there any way he could leave, because they think that it was the brother.
It turned out it was like a good brother, bad brother.
Good brother, bad brother. So when we were there, it was just me and Marianne, and we were sitting there with the owner and her daughter, and these two brothers came. And as we were talking, the two brothers were trying to get their story out. So Marianne was talking for one brother, and I was talking for the other, and we ended up almost fighting because they were both trying to get their story out. And then all of a sudden, I got this weird feeling of super anger. And just at that moment, Marianne goes, ow, and lurches forward, and she goes, something punched me in the back. We lift up her shirt. She's got a big round welt on her back, which the next day turned into a giant bruise, black and blue bruise, that her husband took a picture of. And what it was the one brother was trying to shut up the other brother.
Yep.
It was amazing.
Well, as it turns out, one of the brothers was doing something bad and illegal with children.
Well, it was the children. We found out those children that we kept hearing and those children that were begging for help, he was taking the children from underground. He was utilizing the Underground Railroad to child sex traffic, and he was bringing all these children in from the basement up, and then he would take them around the back to that staircase that was hidden into that room, and then bringing them from that room into that locked room, and he was locking them in the attic. And that's why we were hearing all those children. That's why Art was crying about the children, and then we came up with those names, and they had scratched, and they were down low on the door. Children were sitting, scratching their name, help us, into the door.
Oh.
That was one of your most memorable investigations. I think that was one of the saddest investigations I ever did.
Yeah. Well, we had another sad one too when we were in the Dog Diva boutique. And
that was terrible too.
I mean, people don't realize, you love to hear about history, and you love to be in these old colonial houses, and you think that the history is going to be all good. The properties are going to be all good, and they're not.
No.
I mean, when you think about it, sex, drugs, alcohol, all that
was going on. Rapes, murders.
And that's what we encountered when we were the shops at Lafayette. A girl who was raped and used for prostitution, and all she and her boyfriend wanted to do was to travel on that train to a new and better life. Right,
and they ended up being turning into slaves, they were trafficked too, essentially.
Yes.
There was a lot of that going around. They were kept as slaves, and then he was abused and beat, and she was raped by the guy who was running it was the mill up there, right?
And whoever else he was getting money from to use her.
Yeah.
She was, apparently, we saw on the SLS camera, we saw her being attacked.
Right.
We watched that
in real time.
She was showing us what happened to her, but she was there for the rest of her life. Apparently her and Daniel did marry and have a child, but they were slaves to this man who ran this.
Well, she was his sex slave and he was his worker slave.
Yes.
And they did get married, and they did have a baby, but the baby was born into slavery, and God knows what happened. I don't think we never found out if they ever got out of there. I don't remember.
I don't think they did, because all three of them are buried in Lafayette Cemetery.
Right, okay. So
I don't think they ever got to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah, history is not always pleasant.
No, and that definitely for me, it was a very sad story to watch that unfold before us, because that was a railroad traffic way. So people would come in and out constantly.
Right.
And how we understood the story was they stopped off at this railroad stopping, and when they got out, some bad guys were there and claimed that they stole something from them.
Right, yes.
And that's what kept them there. Even though they said they hadn't stolen anything, they were forced to repay their debt.
Right.
And
that's another one. That's another investigation where we came up with the names, the ages, the dates, and we found them buried in the cemetery.
Yes.
Afterwards, after the fact.
We actually, originally, we only found Sarah and their child, Daniel. We didn't know where the elder Daniel was. And then several weeks later, Brittany and I were cemetery hopping and went there to go and find Hockenberry's grave, and were led to Daniel and Sarah and little Daniel.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Because they didn't have Big Daniel online for some reason. So we ended up finding him. And that was such a poignant moment. I remember Brittany and I just standing there going, thank you for showing us where you are, because we never really knew what had happened to him until that point. Exactly.
And those are the situations that happen where the naysayers don't have standing.
Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that really make what we do worthwhile.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking the time with me today, Laurel, for sharing your stories and background with the rest of the world. And to you, the public, you can follow Laurel and find out more about her and the Lady Ghostbuster adventures at my website, authoreleanorwagner.com, where you'll find video updates and photographs from every investigation. If you liked what you heard and listened to today, please subscribe, like it in the comments. Much appreciated.
And thank you, paranormal enthusiasts, for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back again. Remember to tap into your own gifts. Everyone has them. And in the meantime, make sure you're creeping it real.